Hello and welcome to NewsClick. Today we have with us Professor Jayati Ghosh from Jawaharlal Nehru University to discuss again the Greek crisis. Jayati, we had discussed this 1 year back. What has changed in the last 1 year? Because as we see, the crisis is as bad as it was. The Greek government seems to be on the verge of a default, and people have at least started protesting very vigorously on the kind of attacks that is taking place. What do you think is in the offing in the immediate future?
Well, first you asked me what has changed. What has changed is that it's not as bad as it was, it's significantly worse. The stakes are now much higher for Greece, for Europe, and for all the peripheral countries, and for the financial markets. So everything is significantly worse. The other thing that has changed is, I think, that the scale, or rather the pace of the change has accelerated. So I think a year ago I had said I'd give it 2 or 3 years. Now we're talking in months. Everything has changed so that the speed of all of these movements is so much faster that we're really, I would say, we're approaching the end game.
Do you think Greece is on the verge of a default as it stands today?
No, Greece is defaulting. I mean, I don't think there's a question of on the verge. It's really a technicality now, what you call it. The markets have decided that Greece is defaulting. They have decided to factor that in. The credit rating agencies, which earlier were very slow to pick up anything, now want to be ahead of the game. So they have announced that anything that is a restructuring is going to be classified as a default.
So private banks are rolled over, their debts are rolled over, private debts are rolled over. This will be considered a default.
Well, especially if it is revalued, which is what is going to happen. Now, the question is not how or whether Greece will default. It will definitely default. The question now is what that default means in terms of the rest of the Eurozone and the peripheral countries in particular. And what the last 1 month has shown is that the possibilities of contagion are immense. They're much, much greater than has been anticipated. I think the thing that really concentrated everybody's minds was the attack on the bond markets in Italy. Because the ones that had been lined up, if you like, against the wall to be next in the firing line were really Portugal, Ireland, and maybe Spain. Italy was really, way back in the list. For Italy to be in the private markets, the financial markets firing line, I think that was a bit of a shock. And that shows that the possibilities of contagion are much greater than everyone thinks.
Do you think that if, for instance, the European banks and, of course, Germany and France, so the two leading financial powers in Europe, don't bail Greece out, it would be like the Lehman Brothers in the United States, that though it's only 2.5% of the Eurozone economy, but it actually can unravel the whole Eurozone?
Oh yes, definitely, because they're not going to stop there. The markets will sense blood and they will move on to the next country and the next country, which is why it's no longer a matter of Greece. And resolving the Greek problem is no longer, in fact, the issue. Because let's face it, I mean, okay, you can resolve Greece, you can resolve Portugal and Ireland. It's still expensive, but you can just about manage to cover all of those debts. If it enters Spain or Italy, we are talking big bucks here. So once Spain or Italy enter this process, now we're talking an entirely different level. The European Commercial Bank cannot really manage, even with the huge funds at their disposal, to cover all of those debts. So there is now only one solution. Earlier, you could have had smaller solutions. The solution today is a Eurobond. There is no other solution if you want to keep the Eurozone intact.
But do you think the time has come to think the unthinkable, that actually the Eurozone is or should be dissolved over a period of time?
No, it's no longer unthinkable. People are not just thinking it, they're saying it. The financial press is full of talking about when it will actually break up. I think, though, that it still is open. I remember telling you a year ago that it will really depend on the politics, that you cannot have an economic union without fiscal federalism. And so Europe has to make that choice, or rather the larger countries in Europe have to make that choice, essentially Germany and France. Do we go for fiscal federalism, or do we not have the Eurozone, basically? That's still the case. That's still the case.
It is also very clear that the prevailing opinion in Germany, less so in France, but certainly in Germany, is unwillingness to bail out any other country. And therefore, the pressure from the right in that sense is actually increasing, while the people are on the move in Spain particularly and Greece, the indignant movement, indignatos or whatever it's being called, very clear that this people seem to be moving into that different directions. So do you think a political legitimacy of the Eurozone is actually going to be achieved?
You know, that again, it's very interesting. I completely agree with you that the current politics is such that, and a lot of it is driven by the media, by the way, in both these sets of countries, which is the indignati in Greece or the completely valid popular uprisings in Spain and elsewhere, which say that this is not our debt, we didn't benefit from it, there is no reason to close down our schools and hospitals and throw our workers out of jobs for this. That's completely valid. The media, the popular media in Germany, in France, in Finland, in all of Norway, in Denmark, in all of these countries is feeding a completely false notion that this is a huge burden which has been put on taxpayers in these countries because of profligate southerners. It's completely false. Germany is the single greatest beneficiary of the Eurozone. German prosperity results from its ability to export to these countries, and then they lend them money to export from them, so to import from them. So, you know, this is a completely misplaced way of doing it. However, a crisis has a way of forcing different kinds of change. To me, it's still not clear whether the leadership in Europe is willing to sacrifice the Eurozone. It may well be that they will use this potential of a Lehman-type trigger, which will actually lead to a global financial mess, there's no question about it, to justify a very significant fiscal shift towards greater federalism in the form of a Eurobond. What does a Eurobond mean? It means one bond for any country. So it's no longer the Greek bond or the Spanish bond. It is one Eurozone bond, which is
effectively surrendering a part of the financial independence which they already have in terms of a currency, but further surrender in that sense.
Well, it's
to a European.
Yes, partly it's a further surrender, but you know, for the peripheral countries or for those who are not at the source of it, it's actually a massive improvement from the current position.
But you are looking at another way. Do you think actually it's also restructuring this kind of countries in favor of finance capital in a much larger sense? European Union now is forcing effectively Greece to sell all its assets. All the public sector, the electricity, power plants, everything is on the block for sale. Don't you think it's also a huge opportunity for finance capital to restructure itself and actually buy all these assets at bargain basement price?
Absolutely, but this is an old story for us in the developing world, right? Every financial crisis has basically meant further liberalization, further reduction of the role of the state and massive privatization. So this is an old story. We are seeing it played out in the developed world now, but this is something we're all very familiar with. Certainly this is the case. Remember also that Europe within the developed world still has the greatest role of the state and the public sector. So there's much greater potential for hacking up the state and generating the private assets out of the public wealth, which is true also in France and Germany and Austria, in many of these countries. So yes, there is further potential for destroying the public sector and privatizing these assets. There is a political limit to these things, I think. I think we're seeing the limits emerge on both sides quite clearly.
So again, for what you are saying,
yes,
the jury is still open. Whether actually the Eurozone will disintegrate or will it find instruments to hold together and also generate some kind of legitimacy for a 17-state financial union without a political union.
You know, the jury is open, but as I said, we're nearing the end game. So what I earlier was describing as a time period of several years is now really several months. So this is going to happen before our eyes. The European Union as we know it will not exist at the end of this year. It will either be a completely different and much more tightly integrated fiscal union, or it will have dismembered in parts.
And if the second happens, the global financial crisis will be far more intense than what it is today.
Yes, I believe that's true.
Thank you. I think this has been a very interesting discussion, and over the next 2 to 3 months we'll be following what happens to Greece, the crisis in Greece, and what happens to the European Union. Thank you very much.